Hi, I'm Dongxiang. Welcome to Digging to China, where we explore China in depth to reveal unique perspectives. If you ask people in China what concerns them most about the country's future, those with jobs may worry about unemployment and declining incomes due to the economic downturn. Graduating students are likely to be anxious about the challenges of finding employment in a tough economic climate. Others might be concerned about the worsening of public security in China as a result of the economic downturn, among other issues. Do these problems exist? Yes, they undoubtedly do. However, in the long term, I believe they are not the primary concerns. What we should really be worried about is the ongoing deterioration of China's economy, which could eventually lead to a systemic collapse. To understand what a system collapse entails, we first need to understand China's system, which is a dictatorship. However, even within dictatorship, there are significant variations. From an ideological standpoint, we can distinguish between religiously authoritarian regimes like Iran and Afghanistan and secular authoritarian regimes such as North Korea and Syria under Assad. Of course, the most typical example today is the Chinese Communist Party. We can also distinguish dictatorships based on their economic development. Some authoritarian regimes have relatively strong economies, while others are underdeveloped. Examples of the latter include North Korea, where people still starve, as well as Syria and Afghanistan, where the per capita GDP is only $400, along with China during Mao Zedong era. In contrast, countries with stronger economies under authoritarian rule include South Korea under Park Chung-hee, Taiwan under Chiang Ching-kuo, modern Saudi Arabia, and more recently, China. I refer to the underdeveloped ones as Dictatorship 1.0 or repressive dictatorship, and those with better economic development as Dictatorship 2.0 or developmental dictatorships. Why do some authoritarian countries remain in a dictatorship 1.0 state while others manage to progress to dictatorship 2.0? Some might argue that it's due to foreign relations such as ties with the United States. Others may point to factors like geographic location, resource availability, and so on. These factors certainly matter, but we cannot overlook the impact of political systems. When we look at successful dictatorship 2.0 countries, their leaders are often labeled as enlightened despots. However, enlightenment alone doesn't fully explain their political systems. To shed light on the differences in these systems, I will reference the perspectives of Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, the 2024 Nobel Prize winners in economics. Acemoglu and Robinson argue that authoritarian countries can develop, but the essential condition is that the society must be inclusive. This contrasts with extractive societies where only the dictator benefits. An inclusive society is one in which everyone has the opportunity to prosper, while an extractive society is one where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a single ruler. An extractive society struggles to develop economically. If 99% of the wealth you create is taken away by the dictator, you are likely to lose hope and stop making an effort to add value. Generally, democratic countries are more likely to create inclusive societies because the principle of one person, one vote in democracy reflects a process of redistributing interests among different classes. Each class, through democratic representation, gains a voice in how societal wealth is distributed, which helps ensure wealth is shared across various groups, fostering an inclusive society. Dictatorial regimes are inherently focused on exploiting the population, which makes it difficult to create an inclusive society. Without such a society, economic development is hard to achieve. However, it's not impossible for an authoritarian government to build an inclusive society. It's simply more difficult. From Acemoglu and Robinson's perspective, the central challenge for such regime is building trust. An authoritarian government, by its very nature, is led by a dictator who does not represent the people. Even if the dictator promises to establish an inclusive society, such as assuring people that their earnings won't be exploited, it's hard for the public to trust that their hard-earned money won't be taken away. Building trust that the people's effort will be rewarded becomes crucial. If the dictator can create this sense of trust and prove that hard work will lead to real benefits, the regime can transition into the dictatorship 2.0 model. For instance, in the past, China was in a similar situation. Since the Chinese Communist Party was not elected by the people, slogans like "the peoples are the masters of the country" were largely met with skepticism. However, after the reform and opening up, the CCP built a system that created opportunities for social mobility. Through this system, it earned the trust of the people by demonstrating that there was a chance for growth and development. The system had several key components. One of the main aspects was that, although exploitation still existed, the CCP created legitimate pathways for upward mobility, particularly for those at the bottom of society. These pathways primarily included the college entrance exam and the civil service exams, through which individuals from lower social classes could advance and improve their social standing. For China's urban middle class, the CCP stimulated a rapid wealth growth by increasing property values, providing a means for them to accumulate wealth beyond their salaries. While many have criticized high housing prices, those who trusted the government and invested in real estate were able to achieve substantial returns. In the business realm, a dynamic developed between entrepreneurs and the bureaucracy. Although it is often said that China's business tycoons, particularly large entrepreneurs and the local officials, are part of the dictatorial elite, they are in fact also being ruled. The key difference is that they are more deeply embedded within the system than ordinary citizens. Recently, the CCP leadership promised officials that as long as they focused on boosting GDP and ensuring rapid urban development, they would be rewarded with promotions. At the highest levels, officials could even rise to the position of president, joining the core group of beneficiaries within the dictatorial system. This created a sense of hope for career advancement within the bureaucracy. Moreover, these promises to officials also helped protect business to some extent. In their pursuit of GDP growth, officials were often required to limit their use of power and avoid excessively exploiting businesses. This provided companies with some space to develop, allowing entrepreneurs to accumulate wealth through their efforts and achieve upward social mobility. Certainly, the system China developed in the past, rooted in a dictatorial regime, still faced significant fairness issues. For instance, in the case of the college entrance exam, many children of officials and the wealthy could initially hire someone to take the exam on their behalf. Over time, this evolved into using special tricks, and eventually special talent quotas became another way to bypass fairness. Similar problems existed with the civil service exams, where rotten recruitment practices were common and cheating during interviews were widespread. The promotion of officials was also heavily influenced by nepotism, while entrepreneurs often faced exploitation by CCP officials and so on. However, these issues were overshadowed by the rapid pace of economic growth, which helped mask these flaws. Despite the unfairness of the college entrance exam, the number of positions and the schools kept growing, offering people the opportunity to improve their social status through education. The fast economic growth also spurred rapid urbanization, creating more vacancies in public service. Even if I was blocked by connections today, there was still plenty of positions available, so I could simply try again. There was always a way forward. Similarly, for entrepreneurs, although bribes were still required, the abundance of opportunities in the rapidly expanding economy meant that even with the need for bribery, they could still profit. In fact, these minor flaws became negligible in the face of rapid economic growth. They didn't change the reality that hard work could still lead to upward mobility, which helped build public trust in the CCP. This is why I believe that around 2012, despite vocal critics online, no one truly rebelled. While people were constantly criticizing the CCP and pointing out its flaws, they didn't question the fundamental narrative the CCP had built, that hard work could lead to social advancement. They didn't truly doubt the possibility of upward mobility. As long as this trust remained, China's economy could continue to grow and the society would stay relatively stable, maintaining the state of dictatorship 2.0. Of course, I've made some modifications to Acemoglu and Robinson's perspective. I believe that for a dictatorship to transition into dictatorship 2.0, it's not only crucial for the public to place trust in the dictator, but the dictator must also cultivate their own confidence. Both the dictator's confidence and the public's trust in them are equally important and interdependent. What does it mean for a dictator to have self-confidence? This confidence is mainly reflected in their control over society. Looking at the countries operating under the dictatorship 2.0 model, their democracy scores may not be high, but the overall cruelty of their rules is much less severe compared to dictatorship 1.0 countries. Take China and North Korea as an example. While Xi Jinping may appear ruthless, his repression of dissent is far less intense than in North Korea, where watching a South Korean TV drama could result in execution. Similarly, if we compare the current regime in China with Mao Zedong's era, it is clear that Mao's rule was far more terrifying. The economic development in the Middle East is closely tied to the degree of social freedom. For instance, Dubai, part of the UAE, remains relatively open, welcoming foreign tourists and allowing women to go out without wearing a headscarf. In contrast, such freedoms are unthinkable in places like Afghanistan or Iran. Additionally, while Bashar al-Assad regime may not persecute based on religion, it has imprisoned over 100,000 political dissidents, a level of repression far harsher than most other Arab countries. It's evident that the countries operating under the dictatorship 2.0 model exercise much less stringent control compared to those under dictatorship 1.0. This relative leniency reflects the rulers' confidence. They trust that granting the populace certain freedoms, such as the ability to move, speak, do business, and travel, will primarily be used to foster economic growth rather than challenge their authority. These dictators are confident that even if some resistance arises, it will be limited in scope and strength, posing no real threat to the stability of the regime. The confidence of a ruler plays a vital role in governance. Consider the internet. A more open internet unquestionably accelerates economic development. The greater the openness, the greater the potential for growth. Dictators understand this well. However, increased openness also inevitably amplifies criticism and dissent. Striking the right balance in how open the internet should be becomes a direct measure of the dictator's confidence in their ability to maintain control amid such challenges. China performs better than North Korea in this regard, but lags behind nations like Saudi Arabia and Russia. However, even Putin has recently displayed diminishing confidence, as evidenced by his moves to restrict access to the global internet following military setbacks. Similar challenges can be observed in the Middle East. For instance, the UAE and Iran are both religious states, yet their leaders adopt vastly different approaches to openness. The UAE's leaders do not fear the presence of foreign women without headscarves, nor do they view such behaviors as a threat to their religious governance. In contrast, Iran takes a much stricter stance. Easing restrictions on foreign visitors clearly benefits efforts to attract foreign investment. A freer society is inherently better positioned for economic growth, but in authoritarian regimes, the level of freedom allowed hinges on the leader's confidence. Leaders who lack confidence tend to impose tighter controls on migration, speech, and religious practice. Such restrictions inevitably stifle economic progress, making it difficult to provide meaningful opportunities for social mobility. Without such opportunities, public trust in the government erodes. Thus, the confidence of the ruling authority is a fundamental element for sustaining the authoritarian 2.0 model. Following the Hu Wen era, the expectation was that China would strengthen its authoritarian 2.0 model, fostering greater mutual trust between the government and the people. Under Xi Jinping's leadership, there was an opportunity to relax certain controls, such as loosening restrictions on free speech by allowing access to foreign websites, relaxing societal controls like party membership and media censorship, and easing regulations for foreign nationals, enabling them to travel and reside freely in China. Such confidence from the ruler would likely result in faster economic growth, creating more opportunities for upward mobility, which would in turn increase public trust in the Communist Party and strengthen its stability, thus reinforcing the authoritarian 2.0 system. Yet, China has veered in the opposite direction. Xi Jinping, for reasons unclear, assumed power carrying a profound sense of crisis about the survival of the nation and the Communist Party. His actions since then have vividly reflected a lack of confidence in the party's governance. For example, one of his earliest initiatives was to intensify restrictions on internet freedom, further curbing the space for free expression in China. Xi Jinping's insecurity has led not only to tight authoritarian control to suppress dissent, but also to effort to restore public trust in the Communist Party. The sweeping anti-corruption campaign exemplifies this approach. While it undoubtedly served to purge political rivals, it also sought to address public dissatisfaction with governance. By targeting corruption, the campaign aimed to make education fairer, improve the business environment, and create more equitable opportunity for official promotions. These initiatives were intended to provide citizens with greater chances for upward mobility through their own efforts, thereby reinforcing trust in the government. Moreover, initiatives like the Patriotic Education Campaign launched in 2015 and the Common Prosperity Drive that began in 2020 were clear attempts by the government to enhance public trust. Initially, these measures were effective. Public confidence in the government reached a high point around 2020, and the domestic online discourse saw minimal dissent, with even subtle criticism of the Communist Party becoming scarce. However, this strategy quickly pushed China into a downward spiral of eroding trust. Despite their intended goals, these actions fundamentally diverged from the framework of the authoritarian 2.0 model. The essence of the authoritarian 2.0 model lies in the ruler showcasing confidence, relaxing controls, and promoting robust economic development. This creates a greater opportunity for upward mobility, naturally fostering public trust in the government. It does not depend on indoctrination, aggressive government intervention in the economy, or silencing dissent to build trust. Using coercive measures to convince people of their chances for advancement aligns more with the characteristics of the authoritarian 1.0 model. Xi Jinping's policies have ultimately led to economic decline, eroding public trust in the possibility of upward mobility. The indiscriminate crackdown on businesses under the banner of common prosperity have shaken entrepreneurs' confidence in the Chinese Communist Party, while the drop in housing prices has undermined the middle class's belief in wealth growth, further weakening their trust in the party. For the grassroots population, although avenues for upward mobility like the college entrance exam and the civil service exams have become relatively fairer in recent years, the overall economic downturn has eroded these opportunities. Even if more people can attend university, the shrinking job market means that upon graduation, they still face limited employment prospects. Similarly, while the civil service exams may seem more equitable now, the competition has intensified. Where previously 10 candidates might have competed for one position, now 100 might vie for the same role, meaning the practical difficulty of securing a job hasn't lessened. Overall, the hope for social mobility through hard work has become increasingly distant, particularly for the younger generation. Amid the economic downturn, the frustration of unfulfilled efforts has already begun to take root among young people in recent years. Consequently, public trust in the government is steadily eroding. The breakdown of public trust in the government will only intensify Xi Jinping's feeling of insecurity, particularly given his deep fear of the collapse of both the country and the party. This sets off a vicious cycle. Xi, feeling distrustful, increases control, which harms the economy. As the economy falters, public distrust in the Communist Party grows, further feeding Xi's insecurity. If this cycle persists, it will inevitably lead to a regression to an authoritarian 1.0 state. In this scenario, the leader's deep insecurity forces them to rely on heavy-handed rule to suppress the populace. This type of control leads to a lack of freedom in the businesses and the trade environments, ultimately causing the public to lose hope for social advancement and eroding trust in the government. Many people hold a misguided view about China's future, thinking it will follow the same path as Japan, experiencing a lost 3 decades. There are even investment guides online that compare China's potential future with Japan's, examining which sectors fared well during Japan's lost decades and using that to predict which Chinese stocks might perform similarly. I find this analysis rather amusing. While there are similarities between the factors contributing to China's potential decline and Japan's past stagnation, I believe the future will be different. It's not just because China's per capita GDP is only 1/6 of the United States, whereas Japan's had already surpassed the US at that time. China's per capita GDP remains much lower than Japan's. The fundamental difference between China and Japan lies in their political systems. When Japan experienced its period of stagnation, it did not disrupt the country's political framework. Japan had already become a stable democracy, and its political system simply needed to continue functioning within democratic norms. However, that is not the case for China. Today, China operates under a unique 2.0 system, which is highly fragile. This system is based on a tenuous trust mechanism, and that trust is now on the verge of breaking down. Xi Jinping has started to lose confidence in himself, doubting that the people will not rise up against him. Meanwhile, the public, facing economic decline, has lost faith in their chances for upward mobility and no longer believes their effort will lead to success. This erosion of trust marks the collapse of the 2.0 authoritarian system. After the collapse of the 2.0 authoritarian system, there are essentially 2 outcomes based on global examples: a regression to the 1.0 authoritarian model or a transition to democracy. There's no scenario where a 2.0 system simply drifts on for another 2 decades. After the collapse of the 2.0 authoritarian model, a shift back to 1.0 model would clearly be Xi Jinping's goal, as it would enable him to preserve his power. In contrast, the people would prefer a move towards democracy. From my perspective, it is important for the Chinese people to understand that while the biggest risks in the coming years may initially appear to be economic, such as unemployment and the layoffs, these issues will soon become less significant. Political matters will emerge as the primary concern, and economic problems will fade into the background. When political issues take center stage, one clear example is the zero COVID policy. However, I believe Xi Jinping cannot fully revert China to the 1.0 authoritarian model. This is primarily because Xi's personal authority and the capabilities are insufficient. What lies ahead is a battle for the future, one where the people must decide whether they will live under a new North Korea-style regime or in a democracy similar to Taiwan or South Korea. Everyone must be ready to take to the streets, because soon it will become evident that the fight won't just be about unemployment or career advancement opportunities. Instead, the question will be whether Chinese people will end up becoming subjects of a new North Korea. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.